is a special presentation of areacable.com and the Area Guides Network, produced by CraigShipp.com with special guests from around the globe. I'm Peter McDermott, and now on to our featured presentation.
Okay, and we're going to cut right to Annabelle, and you have a reading for us to start out. We're doing a special show on banned books in the United States of America. Go ahead, Annabelle.
Okay, so I'll be reading from Ulysses, and I'll be reading the last chapter, which was titled Penelope originally, and it's a chapter that famously has no punctuation, so bear with me. It's really tough. So, yes, because he never did a thing like that before, as asked to get his breakfast in bed with a couple of eggs since the City Arms Hotel, when he used to be pretending to be laid up with a sick voice, doing his highness to make himself interesting to that old faggot, Mrs. Riordan, that he thought he had a great leg of. And she never left us a farthing, all for masses for herself, and her soul, greatest miser ever, was actually afraid to lay out 4 pence for her methylated spirit, telling me all her ailments. She had too much old chat in her about politics and earthquakes and the end of the world. Let us have a bit of fun first. God help the world if all the women were her sort. Down on bathing suits and low necks, of course nobody wanted her to wear. I suppose she was pious, because no man would look at her twice. I hope I'll never be like her. A wonder she didn't want us to cover our faces. But she was a well-educated woman, certainly, and her gabby talk about Mr. Riordan here and Mr. Riordan there. I suppose he was glad to get shut of her and her dog smelling my fur and always edging to get up under my petticoats. Especially then, still, I like that in him, polite to old women like that. And waiters and beggars, too. He's not proud out of nothing, but not always. If ever he got anything really serious the matter with him, it's much better for them go into a hospital where everything is clean. But I suppose I'd have to bring him into him for a month. Yes, and then wed, have a hospital nurse. Next thing on the carpet, have him staying there till they throw him out. Or a nun, maybe, like the smutty photo he has. She's as much a nun as him, as I'm. Not, yes, because they're so weak and fueling when they're sick. They want a woman to get well. If his nose bleeds, you'd think it was, oh, tragic. And that dying-looking one off the South Circular, when he sprained his foot at the choir party at the Sugarloaf Mountain, the day I wore that dress. Miss Stack bringing him flour, the worst old ones she could find at the bottom of the basket, anything at all to get into a man's bedroom with her old maid's voice, trying to imagine he was dying on account of her, to never see thy face again, though he looked more like a man with his beard a bit grown, in the bed. Father was the same. Besides, I hate bandaging and dozing when he cuts his toe with the razor paring his corns, afraid he'd get blood poisoning. But if it was a thing, I was sick then. We'd see with attention, only, of course, the woman hides it, not to give all the trouble they do. And it keeps going with no punctuation for another couple tens of pages. So that was Bits of Penelope from Ulysses.
Thank you very much. And Monica, so why don't we do this? Do you still have the piece that you read about Banned Book Week? The intro.
Do.
Why don't you read that? So we'll get that in tonight.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, what we're doing is we're reading bits of banned books in honor of Banned Books Week, which is September 24th through October 1st, 2011 this week. It's an annual event celebrating the freedom to read and the importance of the First Amendment, which is the freedom of speech. It's held during the last week of September every year, and it's meant to highlight the benefits of free and open access to information and drawing attention to the harms of censorship by spotlighting actual or attempted bannings of books across the United States and abroad. Intellectual freedom is the freedom to access information and express ideas, even if the information or ideas might be considered unorthodox or unpopular, and it provides the foundation for Banned Books Week. The books featured during Banned Books Week and the books that you will hear read during this hangout are the targets of attempted bannings, just like Ulysses. And some information about Ulysses. A lot of people think that Ulysses was banned in Ireland. It was actually never banned in Ireland. It was banned in the United States of America. In the 1920s, it was declared obscene, and it went to court. Eventually, after a period of years, a district judge ruled that the book was not pornographic, and therefore it couldn't be obscene. So it was a landmark and historic ruling, and cleared the way for a lot of books.
Okay, I'm CraigShipp, and we're continuing our show on banned books, books that are banned for sale or distribution in the USA for whatever reasons. And I'm going to cut right now to Monica.
Yep, and these are also books that can be banned from a library or from schools because people have found them offensive. And this is Nathan, and he will be reading from Slaughterhouse-Five, a book that has recently been banned from a school in Missouri because parents did not want their children reading from it.
These are two excerpts from Slaughterhouse-Five by Kurt Vonnegut.
You know what it is?
And actually, we're going to pause for just a second. Corey, can you mute your mic, please?
Yes, but I did do something else that should help. But I will definitely mute.
Okay, let's do this. I'm going to go ahead and pause the recording here. Okay, back to you, Monica.
So, anyway, here's Nathan reading from Slaughterhouse-Five by Kurt Vonnegut.
There's nothing intelligent to say about a massacre. Everybody is supposed to be dead, to never say anything or want anything ever again. Everything is supposed to be very quiet after a massacre, and it always is, except for the birds. And what do the birds say? All there is to say about a massacre. Things like, "Putty-weet." I have told my sons that they are not under any circumstances to take part in massacres, and that the news of massacres of enemies is not to fill them with satisfaction or glee. I have also told them not to work for companies which make massacre machinery, and to express contempt for people who think we need machinery like that. As I've said, I recently went back to Dresden with my friend O'Hare. I looked through the Gideon Bible in my motel room for tales of great destruction. The sun was risen upon the earth when Lot entered into Zoar, I read. Then the Lord rained upon Sodom and upon Gomorrah brimstone and fire from the Lord out of heaven, and he overthrew those cities, and all the plain, and all the inhabitants of those cities, and that which grew upon the ground. So it goes. There were vile people in both those cities, as is well known. The world was better off without them. And Lot's wife, of course, was told not to look back where all those people and their homes had been. But she did look back, and I love her for that, because it was so human. So she was turned into a pillar of salt. So it goes. People aren't supposed to look back. I'm certainly not going to do it anymore. I've finished my war book now. The next one I write is going to be fun. This one is a failure, and had to be, since it was written by a pillar of salt. It begins like this. Listen, Billy Pilgrim has come unstuck in time. It ends like this. Putty-weep.
Okay, very good, Monica. So are we going to go straight to another reading? Does someone else?
Yeah, let's go straight to another reading.
Who else has something queued up?
My Lord of the Rings reading. And Maggie, if you could mute your camera, or sorry, not your camera, if you could mute your sound, we're recording. Hi.
Yeah, Maggie, what we're doing is we're doing some readings from books that have been banned at one point or another in the U.S. So anybody that's not reading, we're just asking that you mute your microphone. The button's in the upper left-hand corner. So who is going to read next?
I'm going to do my reading from Lord of the Rings, and then
Okay.
when we're done, I'll do the reading from The Scarlet Letter.
Okay. Action.
So this reading is from The Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien, and this is from the Fellowship of the Ring. But suddenly the mirror went altogether dark as if a hole had opened in the world of sight, and Frodo looked into emptiness. In the black abyss there appeared a single eye that suddenly grew until it filled nearly all the mirror. So terrible was it that Frodo stood rooted, unable to cry or to withdraw his gaze. The eye was rimmed with fire, but was itself glazed as yellow as a cat's, watchful and intent, and the black slit of its pupil opened on a pit, a window into nothing. And then the eye began to rove, searching this way and that, and Frodo knew with certainty and with horror that among the many things that it sought he himself was one. But he also knew that it could not see him, not yet, not unless he willed it. The ring that hung upon its chain around his neck grew heavy, heavier than a great stone, and his head was dragged downwards. The mirror seemed to be growing hot, and curls of steam were rising from the water. He was slipping forward. "Do not touch the water," said the Lady Galadriel softly. The vision faded, and Frodo found that he was looking at the cool stars twinkling in the silver basin. He stepped back, shaking all over, and looked at the lady. "I know what it was that you last saw," she said, "for that is also in my mind. Do not be afraid. But do not think that it is only by singing amid the trees, nor even the slender arrows of elven bows, is this land of Lothlorien maintained and defended against its enemy. I say to you, Frodo, that even as I speak to you, I perceive the Dark Lord, and know his mind, or all of his mind that concerns the elves, and he gropes ever to see me in my thought, but still the door is closed." She lifted up her white arms and spread out her hands toward the east in a gesture of rejection and denial. Erendil, the evening star, the most beloved of the elves, shone clear above. So bright was it that the figure of the elven lady cast a dim shadow upon the ground. Its rays glanced upon a ring on her finger. It glittered like polished gold overlaid with silver light, and a white stone in it twinkled as if the even star had come down to rest upon her hand. Frodo gazed at the ring in awe, for suddenly it seemed to him that he understood. "Yes," she said, divining his thought. "It is not permitted to speak of it, and Elrond could not do so. But it cannot be hidden from the ring-bearer, and one who has seen the eye. Verily, it is in the land of Lorien, upon the finger of Galadriel, that one of the three remains. This is Nenya, the ring of adamant, and I am its keeper. He suspects, but he does not know, not yet. Do you not see now wherefore your coming is to us as the footstep of doom? For if you fail, we are laid bare to the enemy. Yet if you succeed, then our power is diminished, and Lothlorien will fade, and the tides of time will sweep it away. We must depart into the west, or dwindle to a rustic folk of dwell and cave, slowly to forget and to be forgotten." Frodo bent his head. "And what do you wish?" he said at last. "That what should be, will be," she answered. "The love of the elves for their land and their works is deeper than the deeps of the sea, and their regret is undying and cannot wholly ever be assuaged. Yet they will cast all away rather than submit to Sauron, for they know him now. For the fate of Lothlorien you are not answerable, but only to the doing of your own task. Yet I would wish, were it of any avail, that the One Ring had never been wrought, or had remained forever lost." "You are wise and fearless and fair, Lady Galadriel," said Frodo. "I will give you the One Ring, if you ask for it. It is too great a matter for me." Galadriel laughed with a sudden clear laugh. "Wise the Lady Galadriel may be," she said, and yet here she has met her match in courtesy. Gently you are revenged for my testing of your heart at our first meeting. You begin to see with a keen eye. I do not deny that my heart has greatly desired to ask what you offer. For many long years I had pondered what I might do should the great ring come within my hands, and behold, it is brought within my grasp. The evil that was devised long ago works on in many ways, whether Sauron himself stands or falls. Would not that have been a noble deed to set to the credit of the ring had I taken it by force or fear from my guest? And now at last it comes. You would give me the ring freely. In place of the Dark Lord you would set up a queen. And I shall not be dark, but beautiful and terrible as the morning and the night, fair as the sea and the sun and the snow upon the mountain, dreadful as the storm and the lightning, stronger than the foundations of the earth. All shall love me and despair. She lifted up her hand, and from the ring she wore there issued a great light that illumined her alone and left all else dark. She stood before Frodo, seeming now tall beyond measurement and beautiful beyond enduring, terrible and worshipful. Then she let her hand fall, and the light faded, and suddenly she laughed again. And lo, she was shrunken, a slender elf woman, clad in simple white, whose gentle voice was soft and sad. I passed the test, she said. I will diminish and go into the west and remain Galadriel.
Beautiful. Okay. Who did you say you were going to read another right now, or did you want somebody else to read?
No. Somebody else can read.
Okay. So who else has something ready to go?
I've got something ready. Alex here.
Okay.
I think everybody else is muted.
Okay. So we're going to go with Alex, and everybody else stay muted. Okay. And Alex, anytime that you're ready.
All right then. I'll be reading from To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. Just a short passage, but one that I think is particularly relevant given recent events in Georgia. The one place where a man ought to get a square deal is in a courtroom. Be he any color of the rainbow, but people have a way of carrying their resentments right into a jury box. As you grow older, you'll see white men cheat black men every day of your life. But let me tell you something, and don't you forget it. Whenever a white man does that to a black man, no matter who he is, how rich he is, or how fine a family he comes from, that white man is trash. Thank you.
Okay. Now, who else has something they wanted to read? Okay, so Corey, you have something, so we're going to switch. Everybody else stay muted. And whenever you're ready.
Okay. What's it going to be then, eh? There was me, that is Alex, and my three droogs, that is Pete, Georgie, and Dim. Dim being really dim, and we sat in the Krovica milk bar, making up our stocks what to do with the evening. A flip to show whether bastards outdoor dry. The Karuva milk bar was milk plus mesto, and you may, my brothers, have forgotten what these mestos were like. Things changing so scory these days, and everyone very quick to forget. Newspapers not being read much either. Neither. Well, what changing so scory these days, and what prodding some of the new Vishkas, which they used to put on Old Moloko, so you could peat it with Velocat or Synthmac or Dendrencrom or one or two other fixtures, which should give you a nice quiet horse show, 15 minutes admiring Bog and all his holy angels and saints in your left shoe with lights bursting all over your moves. Or you could peat milk with knives in it, as we used to say, and this would sharpen you up and make you ready for a bit of dirty 20-1. And that was what we were peating this evening. I'm starting off the story with. And that was Clockwork Orange by Burgess. I'm done. My voice is sort of off today.
Chelsea,
Thanks,
did you
Colin.
have something you wanted to read?
Oh, I think you're on mute, Chelsea.
Yeah, you're muted.
It would help if I took that off. And I'll be reading two really short different sections from Brideshead Revisited by Evelyn Waugh.
Okay, everybody else make sure you're muted, and go ahead anytime you're ready.
At Swindon, we turned off the main road, and, as the sun mounted high, we were among dry stone walls and ashlar houses. It was about 11 when Sebastian, without warning, turned the car into a cart track and stopped. It was hot enough now to make us seek the shade. On a sheep-cropped knoll under a clump of elms, we ate strawberries and drank the wine. As Sebastian promised, they were delicious together. And we lit fat Turkish cigarettes and laid on our backs, Sebastian's eyes on the leaves above him, mine on his profile, while the blue-gray smoke rose, untroubled by any wind, to the blue-green shadows of foliage, and the sweet scent of the tobacco merged with the sweet summer scents around us, and the fumes of the sweet golden wine seemed to lift us at a finger's breadth above the turf and hold us suspended. Just the place to bury a crock of gold, said Sebastian. I should like to bury something precious in every place where I've been happy, and then, when I'm old and ugly and miserable, I'll come back and dig it up and remember it. The second passage is from toward the end of the book, so it's a bit different. It's frightening, Julia once said, to think how completely you've forgotten Sebastian. He was the forerunner. That's what you said in the storm. I've thought since. Perhaps I'm only a forerunner, too. Perhaps, I thought, while her words still hung in the air between us like a wisp of tobacco smoke, a thought to fade and vanished like smoke without a trace. Perhaps all our loves are merely hints and symbols, a hill of many invisible crests. Doors that open as in a dream to reveal only a further stretch of carpet and another door. Perhaps you and I are types, and this sadness which sometimes falls between us springs from disappointment in our search, each straining through and beyond the other, snatching a glimpse now and then of the shadows which turns the corner away a pace or two ahead of us. I had not forgotten Sebastian. He was with me daily in Julia. Or rather, it was Julia I had known in him in those distant Arcadian days.
Let's see now. Maggie, did you have something you wanted to read? I guess
she's going to be right back. She's going to
disappeared.
get something.
Okay,
So
and
how
what
about
about
that?
Zach?
Yeah, I can do it.
Okay, can everybody else mute except for Zach? And then anytime you're ready.
Okay, I'll be reading a small passage from The Watchmen by Alan Moore. Unfortunately, I loaned my copy out and never got it back, so I'm having to read it off the iPad, which feels like blasphemy. But so here we go. This is Rorschach. The comedian saw the true face of the 20th century and chose to become a reflection, a parody of it. No one else saw the joke. That's why he was lonely. Heard a joke once. Man goes to doctor. Says he's depressed. Says life seems harsh and cruel. Says he feels all alone in a threatening world where what lies ahead is vague and uncertain. Doctor says treatment is simple. Great clown Pagliassi is in town tonight. Go and see him. That should pick you up. The man bursts into tears and says, "But doctor, I am Pagliassi." Good joke. Everybody laugh. Roll on snare drum, curtains, fade to black. Sorry, that was pretty short, I know. But
Monica, did you have something else you wanted to read while we're waiting for Maggie?
I do. I have
Okay.
a passage from The Scarlet Letter by Nathaniel Hawthorne.
Okay, and if everybody else can mute, and go ahead anytime you're ready.
Okay. This is Chapter 18, A Flood of Sunshine. Arthur Dimmesdale gazed into Esther's face, with a look in which hope and joy shone out, indeed, but with fear betwixt them, and a kind of horror at her boldness, who had spoken what he vaguely hinted at, but dared not speak. But Hester Prynne, with a mind of native courage and activity, and for so long a period not merely estranged but outlawed from society, had habituated herself to such latitude of speculation as was altogether foreign to the clergyman. She had wandered, without rule or guidance, in a moral wilderness, as vast, as intricate and shadowy as the untamed forest, amid the gloom of which they were now holding a colloquy that was to decide their fate. Her intellect and heart had their home, as it were, in the desert places, where she roamed as freely as the wild Indian in his woods. For years past, she had looked from this estranged point of view at human institutions, and whatever priests and legislators had established, criticizing all with hardly more reverence than the Indian would feel for the clerical band, the judicial robe, the pillory, the gallows, the fireside, or the church. The tendency of her fate and fortunes had been to set her free. The scarlet letter was her passport into regions where other women dared not tread. Shame, despair, solitude, these had been her teachers, stern and wild ones, and they had made her strong, but taught her much amiss. The minister, on the other hand, had never gone through an experience calculated to lead him beyond the scope of generally received laws, although in a single instance he had so fearfully transgressed the most sacred of them. But this had been a sin of passion, not of principle, nor even purpose. Since that wretched epoch he had watched, with morbid zeal and minuteness, not his acts, for those it was easy to arrange, but each breath of emotion and every thought. At the head of the social system, as the clergymen of that day stood, he was only the more trammeled by its regulations, its principles, and even its prejudices. As a priest, the framework of his order inevitably hemmed him in. As a man who had once sinned, but who kept his conscience all alive and painfully sensitive by the fretting of an unhealed wound, he could have been supposed safer within the line of virtue than as if he had never sinned at all. Thus we seem to see that, as regarded Hester Prynne, the whole 7 years of outlaw and ignominy had been little other than a preparation for this very hour.
Thank you. And it looks like we have Maggie back. And if everybody else can mute.
I'm sorry, I put it on mute.
Okay, if everybody else can mute and Maggie can unmute, and then Maggie, you can start anytime you're comfortable.
Cool. Can you hear me?
Clear.
Okay. Excellent. I'm going to read from Gulliver's Travels because it was apparently banned for being kind of anti-government, so I chose a good passage, I'm sure. I was chiefly disgusted with modern history, for having strictly examined all the persons of greatest name in the courts of princes for 100 years past, I found how the world had been misled by prostitute writers to ascribe the greatest exploits in war to cowards, the wisest counsel to fools, sincerity to flatterers, Roman virtue to betrayers of their country, piety to atheists, chastity to sodomites, truth to informers. How many innocent and excellent persons had been condemned to death or banishment by the practicing of great ministers upon the corruption of judges and the malice of factions? How many villains had been exalted to the highest places of trust, power, dignity, and profit? How great a share in the motions and events of courts, councils, and senates might be challenged by bawds, whores, pimps, parasites, and buffoons. How low an opinion I had of human wisdom and integrity, when I was truly informed of the springs and motives of great enterprises and revolutions in the world, and of the contemptible accidents to which they owed their success.
My concerns are that this is very similar to those that are anti-technology. I mentioned, I think last night, 5,000 years ago when somebody decided to have a fire for the first time and cook some food, there were probably people that were anti-fire. So, and as we've moved forward with technology, every time there's a new development or whatever, people think it's the end of the world and it's a terrible thing. And these debates are also swirl around ideas, and one person has one idea of the way something should go, and somebody else has another idea. And I think the idea here is that as opposed to snuffing out ideas and dismissing them out of hand, that they're open for discussion. And if you have books that are available and people can read and can discuss it and so on, then you learn more from that than if somebody tries to be an arbiter and says all of a sudden that, well, this is not a good idea, let's throw this away. So
Yes.
Did you want to expand on that a little bit?
There's, to my surprise, a lot of people have been confused about what makes a banned book. Why are books banned? And I guess it's not always clear. Some of us may grow up in places where libraries are always free and easy to access, but there are other parts of the world and even other parts of our own countries where books are not so easily accessible and where it's a privilege in order to be able to read. One of my favorite books is called Reading Lolita in Tehran, and it's about how difficult it is to even obtain any reading material, including all of the classics, because they're all banned in Iran. Possession of banned books has at times been regarded as an act of treason or heresy, which was punishable by death, torture, prison time, or other acts of retribution. A book may be challenged or banned on political, religious, sexual, or social grounds. We take the acts of banning and challenging a book as a serious matter because these are forms of censorship, striking at our very core of our freedom to read. And essentially it is an issue of freedom and civil rights.
Well, and really our freedom to think.
Yep.
The book is just a tool really to trigger thoughts and like I say, discussion and exploration. And if the more of those kinds of tools that you lose, then the less likely you're going to be able to do any of those things, I would think. So anyone else have any comments they'd like to add before we...
Sure, I could add something if you wish. One of the reasons I'm doing this is that I'm a parent. I have 2 children in grade school right now, and what actually I would love to be able to see is to have the same look of wonderment or lack of understanding of the whole concept of banning books that they gave me. I explained to them what this week was, and that we're doing this because in parts of the world they ban books, and they literally could not understand the concept that there could be a book that you could not have access to. And the fact that I had to explain that to them was in a certain way taking one little piece of their innocence away. And the moment I said that, my son immediately said, "Wait, there are places where you can't just read any book you want?" And he goes, "That's stupid." And fundamentally, it really is, because it really is about the ability to exchange ideas, and banning books diminishes us all.
Nicely said.
That's very true, and there's a great quote that I used to have on a button, and it says, "First they burned books, then they burned people," and it refers to the actions of the Nazi regime during the Second World War. It started with book burning and idea burning, and it quickly progressed. It's never a good sign when you need to restrict freedom so much that you ban ideas.
The concept goes all the way back to, here's a quote from Roman times. Cicero said, "A room without books is as a body without a soul."
That's right, and even before books, ideas were passed on in stories, word of mouth, and only certain people were allowed to participate in that, and there was censorship and so forth even way back then. So it goes all the way back to any time you have ideas and you have people that have different viewpoints and so forth, there are going to be people that are going to try to use their power and their viewpoints to suppress others. And we've seen what's happened throughout history. Anytime those things are done, it's usually not a good thing. So anybody else have something to say before we wrap it up?
Well, a lot of the books that we've read that were on the banned list, like Lord of the Rings, for example, I mean, I just kind of jumped in late, but a lot of these books don't seem like they have a really, really good, reasonable reason to ban them. But there are some ideas that maybe shouldn't be banned, but shouldn't be spread around either. Like if there's books greatly purporting genocide or racism or saying these things are good, how do you figure out how to control ideas that could be dangerous to people? I know often banning is done out of hand and unnecessarily, but is it banning something? Is it bad censorship to try and control bad ideas?
Well, I guess the way I'd counter that is the way to diminish bad ideas is to debate them publicly. By banning books, by restricting the ability to examine certain ideas, you simply give them more power. There's nothing like the light of day, nothing like the free exchange of ideas, nothing like open debate to make bad ideas really look to everybody who hears how bad they are.
Well, and the other problem with the approach of, okay, I'm going to ban the book because it's a bad topic or bad subject or whatever, is who makes those decisions and where do you draw the line? And that's the problem. That's the slippery slope that you go down. And if somebody comes into the town square and they start voicing a bad idea, then other people are going to shoot them down. I mean, they're going to argue with them. There's going to be debate. And if society decides that that person is disruptive enough, then they're going to put them in jail. So we have ways of dealing with these things, but doing it by trying to control books and literature and people's thoughts.
Should you jail someone for ideas, or should you jail them for actions? Is what it comes down to.
That's right. If somebody comes into the town square and they create a disruption and they commit crimes and so forth, then that's right. But if they're just debating ideas, then you shoot them down with debate, I would think.
I think both of you made a really good response to that.
One of the most hotly debated and widely banned books was Charles Darwin's On the Origin of Species. And if we had not had that book, we would not have any of our modern science and understanding of, basic biology that we have today. And it's still being debated. It's still being banned. So.
Well, and you only have to look back to public statements that people have made in the past, and I keep going back to technology, and I have a lot of examples of this on my website where people say, well, this is the way things are going to be, and basically this is the future. And there was an IBM executive that said people will never need personal computers. And so people don't necessarily know what is good for us and what the future is going to be, and so on. Their judgment is not always great. Their track record of having good judgment, even the most intelligent people out there, if you go back and look at most of their predictions of the future, usually they're wrong. So that means we can't necessarily trust them to make these kinds of decisions.
And the decision like that isn't even one of evil intent either. I mean, it wasn't, the person at IBM who didn't feel that personal computers were necessary wasn't saying so because he was trying to, restrict something. He was just denigrating an idea he didn't agree with.
And he was just wrong. His opinion was wrong. And so that's the thing, is somebody can look at a set of ideas or whatever and say, well, that's a really bad idea, but until it's fully explored and let run its course, maybe it's not such a bad idea. And so
there are plenty of examples throughout history of famous instances where ideas or books were banned. Look at Galileo and the simple idea that there were things in the heavens that did not move around the earth. And for being so heretical, the church banned his writings and locked him up.
I'm sure people were killed for ideas like that. You know, well, people were declared to be witches and put on the stake.
I believe he was excommunicated, actually.
Yeah.
Who, Galileo?
Galileo, yeah, which for those who are not Catholics means essentially that for Catholics it's a step beyond death. It means that your soul is kicked out of the afterlife forever and ever, and you will never get into heaven.
He was threatened with excommunication and was locked away and forced to denounce his books. They didn't carry through the sentence of excommunication, but that's where you get the quote where he's there and he has to admit, declare that my writings were wrong and that no, this doesn't happen, and then sort of under his breath he says, "Yet it moves."
And then you have Martin Luther coming along and nailing his beliefs to the door of a church a few hundred years later, and the cultural revolution that followed. And essentially every cultural revolution that has followed has started with published material that would be banned. The American Revolution, the Federalist Papers that were published were banned by England. All contraband material
the next thing they're going to try to do is ban Google Plus Hangouts.
We won't let it happen.
Here they come. Here they come. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Does anybody else have anything else they'd like to add before we call it a wrap?
Thank you.
Thanks, guys, for coming.
Yep. Thank you for hosting this.
Thank you, everybody. Anybody have a website or blog they'd like to plug before we stop this recording?
I just want to say, read everything that you can get your hands on.
There you go. All right.
Exactly.
Thanks again, everybody, for coming out.